Jana's very kindly agreed to do a bit of a talk from a slightly different perspective on
what did I agree to?
how we have done the actual interaction process. And so you might want to also ask John Murphy, who's sitting there at some point as well. John will put you on the spot. But it's basically how we've got from concept and user interviews through to actual Arches workflows. So,
Yes.
leave you to it.
Thank you. Yeah, I promise if you survive this, you not only get lunch, but also corporate biscuits. So that should be a reward. So, from talks to workflows. I don't have any code ready, so anybody who's keen on that can rest their eyes. I'm always kind of starting with that because I'm not a developer. But I bring a different perspective, I suppose. So when I say from talks to workflows, I don't mean creating workflows from scratch in Arches. I mean digital transformation. So what we have is a current system that is running on a different basis, but we are then need to transfer that onto the Arches. So from this to that, I couldn't find any better representation. So this is just a lot of Excel files that the digital transformation always carries. That can be either the worksheets that the institution is working with, and that's their database, but it can also be the extract of the database. So once you get all your raw data is always going to be in Excel, which is fine. That's what it is. But this digital transformation was essentially over 400 tables for us to create workflows from, and a workable database. So, from 400 tables to 24 workflows. I'm not going to take you through all of them, don't worry, just to put that. So you start with tables. That's all there is to it. You have all the different logs and departments. So if it's not just one department that concentrates on monuments or on consultations, you get all of it. So then you have to accommodate all of it. You need to find the similarities. You need to be familiar with the lookup tables. You need to know what connects to which. And the best way to do it is not only to look at it, but talk to the people who you're doing the transformation for. So you set up workshops, you make sure that you talk to every single department, that you know what they're after, what they want, what they don't want, or what they want to improve. Unsurprisingly, the main table is going to be your starting point. And then from there, as you get familiar with the database and with the columns, you can connect the lookup tables to it. So you start with your drafts, and that's the tools you're going to use as well. So I am a big fan of pen and paper, but I'm also not insane. So I'm not going to send photos of scratched out doodles and paper to the client. I'm going to put it into electronic form, which is easy to edit, but also it's much easier to navigate. So I use PenPot mostly, just because it has so many different ways how to merge the text, but also what to do with it, how to format it, how to connect it to one to another. Honestly, at this point, I should have shares. But also Middleboard, which is great for your diagrams, something a bit more complex if you need, and then just good old email and conference calls. So that's the best way to do it. You can always do in-person workshops, depending where your client is, but also for a variety of different reasons. So make sure that you have just the direct line. So in here, at this digital transformation, we had two different tasks. Essentially, it was to transfer all the data, so all the monuments and all the heritage assets, but also to transfer the processes. So that's where the workflows really came in. So not just to accommodate all the data, but to be able to amend it, work with it, and just make sure that all the processes they do are covered in Arches. So the task one was to changing the working spreadsheets into the workflow to integrate with the database. And the task two was to records to be entered into the database and to be amended in the database. The main aim of this was not just to transfer the data, but make sure that it's also a clean process, that it's easy to navigate. So that's where the workflows came in, really. I'm not saying Arches is cluttered or anything like that, God no. But if you're used to spreadsheets and then you see the full graph for monument or consultation, it can be a bit overwhelming. So it's easier. So what you try to do is take all that, make a new draft, and essentially, once you're presenting to the client to see, look, this is what we did, this is what we're building, this is the draft, this is what we want to do. Essentially, we're showing them what we think their work is supposed to look like in our ideal world. So that can be already not a clash point, but it's a big transition. So make sure you accommodate everything that they want to change or everything they're not happy with. And inevitably, you're going to end up looking like this. But that's just the hazard of the job, I'm afraid. At the same time, it's actually really good fun. Feel free. So, but this is all very theoretical that I'm throwing about. So if I want to give it one actual example, adding monuments to the database. So we have add monument workflow. However, for that, we needed to create a new resource model. So if you see the little blue, I'm sure the people who work with arches will recognize that. It's from the left-hand side table. So heritage asset as a resource model. And you can say, there is no such thing. And there is now. What we needed to do is to add heaps of different nodes because all the digital transformation was on very specific area and very specific cultural heritage. So it was not easy to just throw it into arches as in, this is a direct, it's easy to do from A to B, easy. No, it wasn't like that, which is fine. That's good that you can amend the graphs, that you can add different nodes to it. So what was needed was a unique workflow for the monument, which is 1 out of 4 actually, when it comes to monuments. So I keep saying monument, but there is a difference between the original graph for monument and what we did for heritage asset. So we have 4 workflows that were based on the monument graph, but they're different in each form. It's add monument, add garden, add IHR, which is industrial heritage, I believe, and a building. So all of these have different details in them, different structure. But what's most important is that we needed to integrate the system with existing data. So every single heritage asset has their own reference number. And we needed to continue with that. So the database had to take in account everything that we imported, what's existing, but then also build up on it. So don't ask me how they did it, that's the developer's job, but they needed to incorporate that. So at the bottom, you can see the NISMR numbering. That's just a sample from the monument. So we give it a specific data from a dropdown, from a new concept, and then the database is going to check and just add a new number to the end of it. So it's unique for all heritage assets. Monuments have a different format than buildings. Buildings have different format than gardens. And then the IHR have their own separate number as well. When it comes to locations, you would maybe think, address, it's very detailed in arches. Great. Not so fast. So there is an area called Townland, specific to Ireland and Northern Ireland. I'm still not quite sure what exactly it is, but I can tell you it has about 9,000 entries. So, new node, that's for sure. But all of these were also amended, and existing drop-downs in arches were replaced with lookup tables from HED. So I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was screaming and crying inside when I saw the lingo, as it's going to be when it comes to adding terms into hierarchy. So we had quite good fun with that. But to be honest, give credit where credit is due. So John very kindly mapped all their terminologies against the fish terminologies. And then we needed to add everything what didn't match. So it was either exact match, best next, or a new term added. Right, internal testing. For us, it basically means that we created a very detailed test script, which was just a spreadsheet, but it had every single step next to it with also expected behavior of that field. So it was very detailed. Some of them have heaps of entries, but it keeps us right. And also if we need change anything in the workflow, it just gets amended, it gets highlighted, and it keeps us organized as well. When it comes to testing environments as such, of course, developers have their own local stuff. We have dev and staging set up. We're mainly testing on dev and staging, mostly on staging. But for client, that was different because they have their own UAT and production environments. But speaking of clients, testing, if anybody knows any treats how to lure people to test, I'll take it. But it's easy to say. At the same time, you have to remember that this is our full-time job. It's not their full-time job. They already have their jobs. They have their every day-to-day tasks that they need to work with, need to keep up with, and then we come in saying, we need you to test this. So it can be tricky on both ends. But what we did for them to make it easier, hopefully, is their own test scripts, which were a lot less detailed than ours. It was just the fields step by step without any expected behavior. So we needed people to see how they expected to behave and say like, oh, this is not right, this is right, this is the right drop down, this doesn't have the right information. When it comes to more help from us, we also did like manuals. So that was with screenshots, also step by step, and it was everything started with login to go to a new workflow or to just search. So we did all that for them to make it as easy as possible. And again, we left a lot of room for the feedback. So we needed to know how did you navigate it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you find anything you expected everywhere you expected? So it not only helped them to get more familiar with the system, but it helped us to make sure that we know that what we're doing is right. So their environment is UAT and production, and the final one will be on the production. So what did we end up with? We have 24 workflows. We have 2 platforms for the final home for the client. Internal, which is going to be Arch's platform as it is, and then there's going to be a public asset viewer, which takes the information from the Arch's instance that is going to be used internally. If you want to know anything about that, I direct you to Phil, because that's his brain baby. But he can tell you everything about it. So I have a lot of new gray hair, but at the same time, I'm a lot wiser for it because this was a fantastic project and still is. So we're just getting there, just about to wrap up. Thank you. I'm going to say the exact same thing I said last year. Any non-technical questions? Please?
Should mention as well, if you do want to see some of the workflows, I think it was 24 workflows by the end, but I think there were a number that went by the wayside in the process as well, so there's a few extras if you really want to dig through the... Oh, thanks, Liz. And also just to mention, there's feel free to experiment with our fun video kiosk setup that's sitting outside to see some... Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. That's really nice. I'm really curious about how this department of these new workflows fit into the development of the workflow authoring tool, because it seems like those would be a natural fit. And
yep.
So maybe you could comment on how that worked and whether there was a synergy between those 2 things, like converting
yep.
what people wanted for the system to do and how that influenced the workflow designer.
Yeah. I'll try my best. So the workflow designer is, as far as I'm aware, a great tool when it comes to the base level. When it comes to a bit more nuance and finer things, it needs just the hard coding, as far as I'm aware. So we did use it in quite a few of the workflows. I'm not sure if it was used in all of them, but I don't think so. But at the same time, I think when it comes to pushing Arches to its limits for customization, I think we stretched it pretty far, but it held up, to be fair, especially when it comes to creating all the reference numbers. So when you need to create a new number for a monument that needs to go through a list, that needs to be also not in the database and needs to be in order, that was something that developers hated me for, that's for sure. But yeah, as a tool, it held up definitely, but it was quite a lot of customization when it comes to the finer details.
I had a quick question. You mentioned that doing testing, you had an input spreadsheet to run your tests on. Can you say more about that? Like, what does that look like? And
A headache. It looks like a headache. I also forgot something, so something very important, unfortunately. So when it comes to testing, we do manual testing mostly because it's still one of the most accurate things that we can have, and you need that human interaction with the system to be sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. At the same time, those scripts are actually helping to be foundation for Cypress tests we're also running. So we don't have them for all the workflows just yet, but I think for starting number, we have all the add heritage assets ones. So it's a balance of the two. But definitely you need the manuals first to then develop on the Cypress. But essentially what we did, I mean, it sounds mildly insane, but at the same time it's the most helpful thing. Every single step and every single field has a place in that spreadsheet. You have that as a column, then you next to it have a column in terms of what happens when you click that button or when you open that drop-down, and also what happens when you select something from that drop-down or when you move on to the next tab. So essentially it's virtual step by step of every single step in the workflow. But it helps us remember what needs to happen on every single step. I think that's the most important thing, because it's just some of the workflows are very complex, especially when it comes to, for example, excavations. So it's not only saying where the excavation is, who's doing it, but also generating the excavation number. So again, that's another number generating feature we have there. But yeah, essentially it's just literally step by step what is, where, and how, what happens.
And just to clarify and follow up, so each cell is JSON? Or?
Oh no, it's just a, yes and no. Some of it, it's every single step, so essentially every single, yeah, JSON and nodes. So all of that is incorporated into that.
Interesting.
This spreadsheet is just like layers of actions. Click here,
Yep.
I expect this to happen. Go there, I expect this to happen. And then I'll get a comment where Jana says, no, this isn't what we expect to happen. And then, so it's like how to kind of communicate. So it's just a very tedious, monotonous, how you want to use arches and any edge cases we can think of, and very step by step process.
It's an really interesting pattern to test. Yeah.
So it's definitely, whenever, it's better to replace a lot of the Cypress testing, I think, but it's having those, especially if you've got non-developers on the team, or you've got the people who are replacing clients who aren't building the thing, just the very passive communication issues.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that initially we were doing a bit more, trying to put things through automations and trying to see, can we get this reliable without that? But then what we were finding is that there would be subtle issues come up that were only really human obvious. And so we basically said, okay, well, the gold standard is if someone who's coming from a non-development end, because again, sometimes what we find is that somebody is that if this is no shade on our development team, but if a developer comes and tests it, they might have a slightly different interpretation of whether there's a regression to the end user.
Yeah, there were definitely those conversations happening, as in, like, we have the test scripts and then something happens and I get questions from the developer, are you sure this is what's supposed to happen? And I frantically go through my notes only to make sure that yes, it is what's supposed to happen. But at the same time, there is always this streamline of the communication with the client. So very often, not only when they have their time periods of testing, but John is like I bother him every day, essentially, to just make sure this is happening, this is right, this is definitely right, did I understand that right? Yes. Like these are the steps that need to be taken care of, essentially.
I would say as well, on the workflows, is that, actually maybe following on from your question, Dennis, the workflow builder, I think, was the basis for a number that have then become evolved beyond that point.
Yeah.
But the two major sources of complexity that probably aren't as common in most Arches workflows, one is that they're nearly all reentrant. So there's an assumption that you can add or edit a garden, for example,
Yep.
through the garden workflow. And that also ties into permissions logic, because you can then, let's say in an excavation, different parts of that workflow will be signed off by different people as you progress through the steps. And then the other challenge that we've had is there's also some forking behaviour. Again, depending on which groups, so different groups might be different teams might be signing off different elements, and the order of that might change what happens, that sort of thing. So some of those workflows, I think there's one or two that are more straightforward, but generally speaking,
I think it's genuinely 1 or 2.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, probably John can comment better on the processes, but bearing in mind, okay, you're going to help me here, but the teams involved that are going to be using this as, I think, a fairly major part of their daily drivers. First of all, obviously the records teams, the excavation licensing team,
Planning team.
who are responding to planning consultations, obviously.
There's archive team as well, so they're going to be managing just the written records essentially. But yeah, it's when it comes to the workflows, not everybody within the organization is going to be using all of the workflows. So we had to split the permissions in terms of this group is only going to see those ones, this group is only going to see those ones. And even within this group, maybe they can only sign off the first part of it, but the final sign off, their node is only going to be available to different people. So the hierarchy was implemented in that as well.
The enforcement team, the state management operations team.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the list goes on there.
I mean, when it comes to the permissions and just making sure that everybody has their own areas as they have it now, because what we're doing is essentially merging several different departments when they didn't used to not work together, but seeing each other's work necessarily. So even that has to be taken care of with dashboards, and that's going to be Stu talking about that. I'm sure he will fill you up on it, but it's the permissions were one of the most difficult things to implement, mostly because of how structured we needed it to be and how divided we needed it to be. But yeah.
Taking advantage of standing up here, but I might also add one comment. So you were mentioning about the node additions,
Yes.
and this is something I think I'd be interested to have a discussion in on Wednesday. We aren't primarily focusing on a data cleansing exercise as the actual migration bit, so we're actually doing this slightly the other way around, where as far as possible, without doing anything particularly ludicrous, mapping the data in and then providing processes and workflows for that data to be progressively improved. So that's then meant we've got a slightly awkward situation where there are elements of the models that are not going to be long term, and there are vocabularies that are which also we've a particular approach to doing that I'd like to get into discussion with that gentleman about, where we can do a staged migration effectively. And also a shout out to Phil and to John, who've done a huge amount of work on the mappings, and to Rebecca as well, on the mappings of Northern Ireland taxonomies to fish. So thank you. Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Jana. And yeah, for today.